Well, hey there, everyone. Sorry, yeah, the music's gone. I don't know what happened. The file must have gone a bit wrong. So, hello, everyone. Sorry to leave you in a awkward, silent place, but yeah. Oh, there it goes again. All right. Where's my other? So, this is the one I want. Yay! Oh, Sunday. Whew. How's everyone doing? You gotta be doing better than me at this point. It's a minimum situation. I thought I had my tech all sorted out, and I do not have my tech all sorted out. All right, everyone, let's get right into it. I hope you are having a good Sunday, wherever it is, whenever it is you are. I am Kristi. It is Sunday, and that means it is time for Social Science Sunday. Today, we're going to be going a little more in depth into this notion of what it means for there to be a social reality, because it's not quite as intuitive as a very basic, simplistic, quite unsophisticated version of that, how things exist. And so in the natural sciences, especially early on with the rise of the Enlightenment and more evidence-based ways of acquiring knowledge, one of the things that they did was scientists at the time would see something and not really question it, not really question the role of their perceptions or how language, they just see it like this is a nail file. And they had a very, like, what you see is what you get. It was kind of uncomplicated. Language wasn't necessarily really considered in terms of its role in creating or limiting what could possibly exist. And these things kind of came on with time as other philosophers sort of made contributions and critiques. Also just, the process of thinking about things more deeply. And when you also get civil rights movements, for instance, as time went on, initially academia was entirely dominated by, in the West, white men. Eventually, white women got to play a role, but it was in a highly, like a masculine setting with a lot of masculine norms. And just the presence of women, the presence of people of color, the presence of like LGBTQIA people, it forces a confrontation with the expectations of what is to be expected and what is normal, because that normality, those practices, those situational, interactions between people and power structures are created for one kind of group, and they might not necessarily fit all different kinds of people. So anyway, let's get on with a bit more about what does it mean to say a social reality exists. And to get the conversation started, I want to show a little video. So first I want to say hi. Hey Sib, good morning, good afternoon. DN Fan, good to see you. Argent, guten Morgen to you, or guten Tag. Also, Sib, feeling emotionally exhausted. Guess yesterday meant more to me than I realized. Yeah, welcome to my world. Playing some D&D with one of my friends here in the chat, and absolutely, there's like emotional labor that's gone into my role playing in my other game the other night. So, thank you everyone for showing up and for supporting me and helping me to get your learn on. Hey, reality check, Easy 7. Yeah, good to see you. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's probably, in all honesty, one of the most emotionally engaging D&D sessions or campaigns I've ever been on. But to say that it hasn't had taken up a lot of my mental space and processing would be a lie. All right, but let's focus on a social reality that exists in the world as opposed to social realities we construct around the gaming table. And I found this little video. I thought it was quite good insofar as, yeah, you can hear me. Okay. It's a nice little summary, and we'll be able to stop and dig into this. And by we, I mean me. So let's go ahead and hear what constructivism as a philosophy of research is, according to Philosophy Quest, this channel. All right, here we go. Hold on, wait. No sound yet. Sound coming through, and okay. Now let's see if that works.
So what is constructivism?
How loud is that? I think I could probably turn it up a little bit because her audio isn't brilliant. Not that mine always is, but I want to make sure that I'm not being blown out and you can still hear. All right. Yeah, you're not losing Vianney. No. No. There's a whole post. I feel like I need a therapy session to go through after that. Anyway, getting focused on this.
Well, let's look for clues. Constructivism, construct, construction.
Okay, this is a little bit basic, but stick with it. Stick with it. Stick with it.
Constructivism is about construction, the construction of reality and knowledge. It stands in
Now, when I said I'm gonna pause this because these are sort of two very important concepts for us to think about.
reality and knowledge.
Reality and knowledge. What does it mean to say we construct our reality? That's something that we're going to talk about a little bit more in this episode. There's also, we haven't talked about it too much, but we should. What does it mean to construct knowledge? Because what constitutes knowledge and what counts as knowledge has a big influence on a society, right? For instance, one of the ways that patriarchy operated across the centuries was, for instance, even when, as science advanced, women who were midwives, midwifery, were pushed out by doctors, right? And so the kinds of knowledge that they had built up through experience and folklore and whatever else they had in terms of training in those days, this medicalized knowledge, this sanitized, very masculine, very distant, very clinical, very detached forms of treating illnesses and seeing a disease as something that was wrong with the person that had to be fixed, which is like a very compartmentalizing way and reductivist way of looking at health. That kind of knowledge became seen as more important and privileged, and women who were doing this despite a lot of work and expertise, that knowledge was considered to be, well, if you go far enough back, witchcraft in the European context, or unreliable. And so who gets to construct knowledge is not given. Knowledge construction is a kind of a contested space because what some people consider knowledge excludes things that could be constituted as knowledge from other perspectives. Now, for instance, the idea of lived experience being a source of information where we can construct knowledge about how people experience the world. So when we talk about this, I do think it is just, I know I'm kind of babbling a little bit here, but knowledge isn't given, it's constructed. And when you know that about it, things are just a little bit more, it's not saying that they're not right, but they're not as solid as people tend to think they are. And let me just go on one more tangent before this, right? From a constructivist point of view, from my constructivist point of view, the notion that sex is a binary is not a given in nature. It is the product of a tradition of patriarchal control going back to the Bronze Age. And in that Bronze Age society, they didn't have legitimate grounds for maintaining an oppressive structure. And so one way to uphold the patriarchal structure is through fear and violence. And the other one is through voluntary submission. And if you have your God in a masculine form declaring that there's male and female, and males have all these privileges because God said so, and females don't, right? Then people who are males are strongly invested in preserving that power structure. It has nothing to do with the rightness or the wrongness of the scientific quality of the categories, because it's never been about scientific accuracy in these situations. And when it comes to the Bible, it's about social control. It's about having clear lines as to who gets to wield power and why and who doesn't. And so taking this notion of sex as a binary grounded in power and exploitation and oppression, not in nature, and using that framing for basically, all of Western history and probably anything that, Judeo-Christian, Jewish history, anything with Muslim influence, everything that goes back to basically the Bible, and I'm talking about. has built on this system of exploitation and submission. Therefore, when Charles Darwin or other natural scientists went to study the world, they didn't go as an open book. They didn't go seeing with no preconceived notions, no categories of already existing, right? They had, all of them had this binary construct, which they equated with truth, but it's not. It's a constructed reality. And in this case, because you're expecting to see a binary, then what you do is, instead of looking at the data and seeing the data and being data-led and going, okay, there's a lot of variation here, and we've got animals across nature that can change their sex, or they're hermaphrodite, or you've got situations where male horse, whatever swimmy things, carry the babies. So there is no stability in nature. There is no given. It is only variety. But what do? They come with their preconceived notions because that is the reality they're imposing on the data. And that construction of knowledge then becomes a truth claim. But the truth claim itself isn't based in truth. So you can see how when you start to unpack these things, who said, according to whom, you realize that the foundations of knowledge are not, they're not meaningless, but they're not solid either. They're tentative on that. All right, so that was a long riff, and we're 20 seconds in. So, yeah, I would love to talk about the D&D session because so much happened, but I need to focus. So, but thanks to me. Yes, I feel like someone should hug the lads.
It stands in contrast to positivism's assumption that there is one reality out there to be discovered just as it is, and objective knowledge out there to be gained. Constructivism looks at the interplay of forces that bring reality and knowledge into being. Constructivism.
All right, backing up again. Yeah, it might be a lot like this today, but she says things and they're really, really deep, and we don't have time. We don't have time to go into them. All right, so let's think about this positivist perspective. It makes sense why, from the natural sciences, this is a perfectly prima facie positive plausible way of looking at the world, right? Because gravity is gravity is gravity. The speed of light is the speed of light is the speed of light. Quarks are quarks are quarks. And even though if you can't predict them with a certainty, with a determinism, you can give them a probability that allows you to make an informed guess. So when it comes to thinking about the physical world, we start with things that are objects. But again, that doesn't make them objective, as if the way that things are organized exist beyond the human mind. Right? I know I've talked about this, I think, a couple times, but if you take away language and you take away concepts, which is very hard for us to imagine what that would be like. What would it be to exist without having a language, a name, categories for things? It, at least to my mind, just becomes an endless interaction of matter and energy. And there's, unless you start drawing lines around things, it's all just a moving mass. It's not like, the things that are happening on the sun are somehow so special that they can only ever happen in these kinds of stars, and we have this objective proof about this one kind of chemical process that if anyone looks at, they'll always come to the same conclusions. The point here is that whenever we interact with the physical world, we can't possibly perceive it with a pure objectivity, because where our sensory perceptions, our language, the way our brains are organized, are already sitting in a subjective position. So how we achieve objectivity as subjective beings is by triangulating experience and looking for outliers of things that don't happen. So in the case of, let's say, water, fresh water, not seawater, but fresh water boiling at sea level at a temperature of 100 degrees Celsius, right? If, everyone who goes around the world and goes sits or gets close to that or whatever and does this experiment, and we all get the same result, and every time we do it, we get the same result, eventually we develop some confidence that there is an underlying process here that has stability, right? And we don't find its objective existence by one person looking at it. We do it through the culmination of a lot of subjective verification and validation. And if you do that often enough, basically it's like Popper and withstanding falsification, then you go, okay, this is something that we can rely on. We've coordinated and triangulated these things together that we can have some confidence that this is a, until the evidence tells us otherwise, this is a thing we can trust. Gravity, the speed of light, whatever. I don't know that many other things about like astro or quantum physics. And then the category, the logical error that then follows from this idea that, well, if I just look at the world and I perceive it, that's how it exists. I don't play a role in this. Language doesn't play in a role. I am just, an empty vessel perceiving reality and describing with neutral language what I see. Once you accept that kind of knowledge, that objective knowledge is impossible about the universe, then, or objective perception, I should say, that direct, unfiltered, unbiased somehow perception of the world, you can't then claim that your knowledge is objective. Your knowledge still comes from a subjective process. And, for people who say, well, the material world exists and it just is, and we don't play any role in it, then I just come back to that staple question. How many planets are there? How many planets were there in 2000 or like 1975? 1975 and 2020. The number of planets in our universe, that fact has changed, not because the number of rocks in our universe has changed, but because our language and our categories, our concepts changed the number of planets that exist. Because we can do that. Because we could say, like there's only 3 categories of planets in our universe for, it wouldn't matter because it's up to us, right? But to confuse our ability to describe things which we perceive as having consistent results, it doesn't give us the authority of objective truth, and then I think when it comes to things that are really, really true, you have to look at mathematics, you have to look at things that are more rational, maybe, because I think empirical knowledge is situational, and not situational, it's editable. It's able to be upgraded. But people who don't think a lot about how we construct knowledge might have a confidence of unawareness. They're overconfident in the grounding of their statements. And that's something that I think you see a lot in the natural sciences, and you see from people who are, gender bigots. I'm not saying gender critical, because critical implies they're thinking. And I see a lot of essentialism and not a lot of thinking from that side of but they are trying to appeal to would get back to, the truth of sex. There is no truth of sex. There is no truth of sex. All right. Oh, this is going to go fast. 3 minutes. Okay, 35 seconds in. And we're already 20 minutes into the show. All right. That's generous. Yeah, yes, I agree. I think they're full of crap and aligning themselves with Nazis, but okay.
Knowledge into being. Constructivism is a term applied in different ways at different times in philosophy, sociology, and research. It is also sometimes used interchangeably with constructionism and social constructionism, so nailing down what it is exactly can be difficult, but we'll try to get a general idea. Constructivism's ontology, or understanding of being, is generally classified as relativist. There is not one reality. Rather, there are many relative realities, specific to and co-created in the context they are part of. A constructivist would likely say that my reality will not be the same as your reality, because we have each constructed our realities together with our communities, our societies, and other forces.
All right. So again, I'm gonna slow your roll on this one, because it is important here to distinguish between a consistent experience of reality when it comes to social realities versus, okay, no worries about it, easy, come back, you can catch it later. So guten appetit for your dinner. I hope it's tasty. The experience of one's lived experience as a human being in a social world versus how the material world affects all of us, right? So when it comes to reality, right? And we talked. I kind of pointed at the slides from Vicky Burr's or Vivian Burr's social constructionism. What do we mean when we say reality? Do we mean what is? Do we mean what is true? There's a couple, so this is when we kind of like we lack language. We lack enough categories of language to really be precise with clarity. So I want to jump in here. I can't think of a single social constructivist who would argue that people's experience of gravity would be different based on their demographic location or anything to do with the physical world part of reality. But that isn't the only reality that exists. There is also a social reality, which is less visible, but probably I would argue equally or more important influence on the quality of people's life. And no, you're fine, DN fan. You're completely right. The intersex people, there's different chromosome compositions. There's different ways of gene expression when it comes to those things. Yeah, the idea you could have two categories that nature would ever produce a clear binary is laughable. So yeah, I get that. And this is where oftentimes too I find that the physical scientists will try to mock through their own ignorance, really mock social constructionists for saying, oh, you have your own kind of way of, there's feminist science and there's black science and there's all these kinds of things. Well, what those traditions tend to do is take a different approach or have a different framework or center someone else in a different category of intention or attention to a topic. And so, there is a lot of control. If you are an authority who produces knowledge, you have a lot of control and power over people. And to think that field wouldn't be worthy of critique or investigation, or that it would be complete. That's the other thing too, is that there's arrogance amongst the natural scientists that, even if they don't know the whole story, that they can somehow explain everything. That it's impossible that they might not have access to a kind of knowledge. Right? This, I think, for some privileged white guys blows their mind. This idea, like, no, you can't be an expert on this. I'm sorry, but like you can read about what it's like to be a trans person, but as a cis person, all you can do is empathize. You can't know. You can't lecture people who've lived through this on what they didn't experience, because you don't know. You can't be an expert in this. And that kind of democratization of knowledge is quite threatening for people who use the authority of their position as knowledge producers and the controllers of knowledge to say what is and isn't true. So when we talk about the construction of reality, we're not talking about the physical, this kind of construction of reality. We're talking about what rules shape what clothing you can wear when you leave the house that day. Or, on a beach, whether or not you can take your top off and be taken to jail or not. That's a social construction. Whatever it is that your lived reality is, from day to day, that's not the same as your social experiences and interactions. It's not the same as equating it to the discovery of material reality. All right, let's get back into it.
It is not just people and our cultures, conventions, and institutions that constructivists see as forming reality. Rather, the interaction between people as individuals or groups with the physical world around them construct reality. Constructivists generally...
All right, so there's actually a really important line in here, which we have to go over.
Construct reality.
Let's listen to it. Go back a little bit more. Here we go.
That constructivists see as forming reality. Rather, the interaction between people as individuals or groups with the physical world around them construct reality.
All right. It was years ago, I read is it The Reality of Social Construction or The Social Construction of Reality? Can't remember. One's by Berger and Luckman. The other one's by John Searle, or very close. And Searle said something in his book that really struck with me because I keep trying to find a counterfactual to this, but I haven't really so much been able to do it yet, which is the thing about a social reality is we tend, I mean, if you think about it in terms of behaviors and what people do, it's not, like driving on a certain side of the road or living in a democracy. These kinds of qualities of existence don't necessarily feel physical, right? If I am pursuing justice in a case, what does this mean? It's different from, like, pursuing my dog as she runs across the park to meet up with another dog, right? That has a very sort of physicality to it. But what Searle noted is that those things in our world that are socially constructed, I think he said without exception, so I might be misquoting him, but I don't think so, have some sort of material representation in the physical world. So an example of this would be marriage is a social construct that doesn't have a material existence, but through custom and practice and acceptance of the community validating a marriage, we will then have physical representation. So it might be in the form of rings. It might be, probably is some sort of marriage certificate that is done. There is a person who is authorized to carry out a ceremony, or is seen as, having the authority to do so. And so when you get married, that category, that states the condition of being, is not just enough to say I'm married. You still need something in the real world to represent that. Another example is money, right? I don't have any money on me right now, but if we said that my nail file again, is a 10 euro note, 10 euros, it's the paper isn't worth 10 euros. It's a symbolic representation. And as you go through the line, what does it mean to have justice? Well, we have this sort of system of education where certain people, if you want to do this law thing, you have to go to a special school and you have to get certain skills and you have to pass a test, right? And then you get the authority to do special little things and file special little papers, and you get to talk in front of a person who's also got a special role as the judge, which she or he might be working on, whatever the case is. And so as long as you do all these things, you get your piece of paper, you get your diploma, you get your bar exam, right? You stand physically before the bar. There are a lot of material supports all reinforcing this social validity, the validity of the legal process, right? And whether it's decisions or copies of appeals or evidence presented, that whole thing of justice, all of it has a material component. And that's why I think it's important when she says here, and even in the last picture, there's pictures of money, there's pictures of icons, symbols of national pride, or symbols of national identification. Here we've got the NASDAQ, the economy running again. Social reality, even though we might not necessarily see it directly, there is some sort of like material linkage there. There is some sort of physical manifestation of the things that we call a social reality. All right, so DN Fan says, honestly, our version of time is kind of socially constructed. Yeah, absolutely. I want to hear about how other animals make up their own version of time, because most of them don't grow up at the same rate. Yeah, rates does, yes. I was watching a Dodo video about a woman who found a moth that had just come out of its shell, its cocoon. And she got like really attached to it and ended up like living in her back garden, and it would crawl on her hand or whatever. And she kind of like put it on this tree to keep it safe from a storm one night. And she came out the next day and there was a male. And then she came back the next day and her moth friend was gone, but all of why am I on this? I don't know. Like, anyway, the moth had left all of her babies behind. She had like 200 little caterpillars, and the lady like adopted them all and managed to get 180 of them to the moth stage, and then she was like releasing them. And so yeah, like the timeline, the time span or the experience of a moth. Oh, you know what? Actually, a better example might be, I watched a fascinating documentary, DN fan, about chimpanzees have phenomenal short-term memory. They have just absolutely fantastic, to levels of details humans can't recall. And they test this by giving them like a computer screen, and it's like an X's and O's kind of thing, whatever. And they'll flash up for like 3 seconds a pattern. And it might have 3 objects in it. It might have 17 objects in it, whatever else, you know. And then the chimp has to press all of the space, and then it goes like blank, and then it just comes up, and they've trained them. They have to like recreate, like where did you see these things? And their instant recall in terms of short-term memory is far beyond humans. Their long-term memory, though, is gone. They just seem to live in very vivid moments of brief, like they have like, if you have trauma and stuff, something scares them, right? They have like associations. But yeah, in terms of that experience of really being into the now, to the point where, you know, you can recall like where 23 things were on a screen just 5 seconds ago. I can't imagine. All right, back to the video. I think I can actually maybe make myself a little bit bigger in the bottom here. Yeah, all right. Not that I'm that interesting to look at, but I will at least try to be a more visible presence on screen. All right, here we go.
Constructivists generally therefore do not deny the existence of a world outside of human perception. Rather, that external world has a place as one of the forces that bring reality into existence through interaction. Constructivists believe that objects have existence, but not meaning outside of human perception.
That's huge. It's just it's such a short little phrase, but it's got so much meaning packed into it. Let's use those, hear those words again.
As a place as one of the forces that bring reality into existence through interaction. Constructivists believe that objects have existence, but not meaning outside of human perception.
Objects have existence, but not meaning outside of human perception. That's a very eloquent way, a very efficient way of summarizing that difference. Yeah, things exist, right? You know, bits, people's sexual bits exist, but those are morally neutral. They just are, right? It's not until humans come along with our language loaded with meaning and norms and values and preferences that, you know, that doesn't exist in the category in the spectrum of sex. All of that stuff we bring with us, and it's not there in the outside world. And so that whole thing about things have existence but not meaning outside human perception really summarizes the contribution, the intellectual contribution here of constructivism, because through this you acknowledge the role that humans play in co-creating with material reality a knowledge for us. We're not direct perceivers of truth that we then write down, right? We're interpreters. And accepting that role as an interpreter is part of the humility of your knowledge claims. So.
The epistemology or understanding of knowledge in constructivism is often classified as a relativist one, though not as fully relativistic as some perspectives. This relativism is not to be bemoaned, though, as positivists may be tempted to do.
That's King
Rather,
Duck crying.
a constructivist sees the varied, nuanced understandings that different people bring into being as enriching our knowledge of the world. Mm-hmm. And within these varied perspectives, there are still criteria for getting to truth. For constructivists, meanings are not all equally valid. There is not one right or objective meaning, but meanings vary on how relevant or fulfilling they are. Their value can be informed by how attentive they are to the object they reflect, or how well they balance the dialectical process of mediating the interaction between subject and object. As researchers, constructivists may take many paths. However, they all acknowledge the role that subjective experience and values play on knowledge in the research process.
And this is it. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to bring your values into the research process. It's that you can't deny that you are bringing values into the research process by, smuggling them in through some sort of hiding behind a claim of neutral language that isn't loaded or doesn't have a value system or isn't situated within a value system. It's acknowledging that that's part of our knowledge production. And it's by understanding that and declaring that and being transparent with it. That's how you do good science or you do good research. Not everyone who's a constructivist is going to do, they're going to do constructivist stuff, more qual. And that's, again, about a level of humility. It's not about imposing your woke perspective. It's just understanding that we can't be, like empty vessels of truth. We're bound up in language and biases.
Many will attempt to harness these opportunities that arise from subjectivity.
All right. Yeah, and then harnessing subjectivities of how you collect your data. All right, so why did I show you this? Well, one, there's just a lot of good little nuggets in there that I wanted to pull out, which I thought were useful grounding, because if you don't understand your ontology, I'm just going to go to regular camera now because I don't have slides for this. I'm kind of winging it today, y'all. But what I wanted to connect here is this, this social reality, physical reality feels, like this. All right. Physical reality has a thing to it. There are ways that we can interact with it or measure it at least. Social realities ultimately, it's a challenge to observe. When it comes to social constructivism, it is empirical, right? Just like the positivists, we rely on our sensory information. We're not using calculus to figure out what people think, right? We're going out and we're asking what people do, think, and say. But then, is that sufficient? How else can we understand how social reality operates? Now, let me give maybe a little bit of an example that is helpful. First, I should say that one level of thinking about the existence of social reality, someone's got a car going on, is, I'll do first structure and agency. Right? To some extent, individuals have the power to shape their worlds, but that ability to shape their world is in large part itself shaped by much larger social forces or institutions or the practices of their governments. And so structures are those things that have some kind of formal, recognized process of interacting with a population with specific goals in mind, whether that's public education, whether it's collecting taxes, whether it is the justice system, eating healthy, whatever it is. And we're talking about not just individuals acting in concert. We're talking about procedures and goals and a whole system that backs up a group of people. And that's quite different. A formal structure, is, you can think like the hierarchy of a church. And you can have similar structures, let's say there's a group of people who get together and play D&D, and maybe there are some norms and customs for those people that they develop over time, but that's not quite the same as if you went to a formal Adventures League thing where, there's a whole structure and competition and all kinds of stuff. So just because people do things together doesn't mean it's a structure. Structures have usually some kind of acknowledged social status or authority given to them or acknowledged to be by them. Whereas individuals doing things, they can do that with or without that kind of authority. So that's one part of what I wanted to talk about in terms of it. And then when it comes to understanding the investigation of social reality. Okay, I know. Okay. Let's look at it from a positivist point of view and what the advantages are of adopting a positivist point of view. This notion that, I don't know where it is here, but there is one reality, right? There's one reality out there that we can access. Um, now, the other part of that assumption, that positivist assumption about the way that the world exists in this way, is that it has the benefit of allowing us to treat processes as if they were, hey, welcome back, Easy. They give us the advantage of treating processes as if they were like forces of nature or like the force of gravity. That there's probably like, I'll simplify it because some people would disagree, but there's basically like a consistent force at work here that we can, if we understand that it's at work and we can observe its effects, then we can kind of predict how it's going to affect people going forward. And, you know, whether or not the everything about it for every individual is true, the benefit of looking at laws, you know, like to think about rational choice as a theory that is on par with, you know, the theory of gravity in terms of its falsifiability or whatever else, or socialization theories, childhood socialization, adulthood socialization, gender socialization. There's a lot of socializations going on. If you think of that as a process that has some kind of regularity and routineness to it, then you can do regression analyses and you can do very special kinds of tests on the data and obtain a level of certainty within a margin of error as to what are the most important factors in an outcome. And that too isn't derived from just neutrally looking at a result and going, oh, I am a developer of knowledge. I see this, therefore it exists. You have to test a theory a lot of times and get repeated, you know, results that end up pointing in the same direction or having the same size effect or whatever else to be considered reliable. But that way of looking at the world, kind of whether or not it exists, the way gravity exists, it's convenient. It's helpful. It's a bit of a shortcut. And also, on the other side of it, the benefit to looking at the world from a positivist point of view is that generally we get it like we kind of measure things like we're polls. Sorry, like the polls in, was it 2016? They were only off by like 3%, but they were off on that sort of like 50 to 51, 52% part of the spectrum, you know? So they were, the polls were within the margin of error, but that margin of error sat within the results range, right? And so it looked a lot worse. Statistically, it was the same, but the result ended up being different because of how, you know, it wasn't because of the maths, it was because of the election and how it worked. So the convenience of a positivist perspective is that it just kind of lets you treat everything as if it was a reliable, consistent, natural process, and you just keep using it until it doesn't work. If you find something, you know, if it stops working, then the situation's changed and you've got to investigate. And you won't really have that with gravity. But it does facilitate the use of a lot of really useful and insightful and powerful statistical tools, methods of analysis that meet that very high threshold of knowledge production in the sciences, in the tradition of the sciences. Constructivist knowledge from a qualitative point of view doesn't have that kind of certainty. Qualitative data doesn't have a margin of error per se. But what it provides instead is a deep, rich insight into real people. If I create a model of voting behavior that say, you know, someone's likelihood of voting conservative in the next election is some function of a constant, everyone, plus their party identification, you know, impact, plus the region that they live in, plus like whether or not they voted in for conservative in prior elections, whatever it is that I want to put in my model, right? I can get very precise estimates of the impact of each one of those metrics in my model if I do everything correctly and according to good scientific practice. But with qualitative research, but no one individual is going to, that model of all those coefficients, like each individual has their own score on it, but there isn't one person who is that model. You know, the model is an aggregation of a lot of variation. And so you don't really get to, it's not a real person. I mean, it's interesting, it's facts, it's data, it's replicable, it's transparent, it's got a whole bunch of benefits to it, but it's not going to help you understand a person. It's going to help you predict an outcome or explain an outcome. And so if you want to understand how people experience social reality, if you want to understand how norms shape people's behaviors, or how people's behaviors shape norms, or whatever your interest is, then you have to talk to people. And it ends up being a lot less generalizable and a lot more specific. But the benefit of specificity is depth. And so, we have, for instance, we have a lot of writings from, a one kind of class of Romans. And we see everything through their eyes. We have to try to read through their biases, through their cultural understandings, through, their own propaganda efforts or whatever else. And from there, you try to go and put together archaeology and anthropology and funerary inscriptions to try to get at what was it like to be a slave or a freeman but poor in Rome? What was it like to be a woman in Roman times? Maybe not as a Roman citizen, maybe as a Roman citizen. We don't have access to that information because those people didn't have anything written down. That doesn't mean imagine if there was some qualitative researcher who had gone around and gone through different parts of Rome at different periods of time and done interviews with people. And could we say that from that interview that we understood every single woman who ever lived in Rome, or we could generalize out from one slave experience to every single slave in Rome? No, but even if we can't generalize from that data, just having that first person own language account of them telling their story. Now, of course, there's narrative elements, right? People are going to try to make themselves look good. There are a bunch of psychological things going on, but we know about that, right? But think about how valuable that would be to giving us a direct insight into what that was like. And at the end of the day, for qualitative researchers, that's what they're looking for. They're not just looking for a survey where I predetermine the wording of the question, I predetermine your response options. I decide whether or not you can say, I don't know. I can decide whether or not you have an other option, and you have to fill out something. I'm, as a researcher in a quants thing, I've got all the control. But qualitative research acknowledges the expertise of the person that you're talking to. They're the expert on why they did that thing. They might be rationalizing it to themselves, but still they are making sense to themselves. They're telling themselves a story that makes sense. And that's the story that we want to hear. And so you can't kind of get the detail and richness, the specificity of history and location and time with quants that you can with qual. But qual requires pages and pages and pages and pages of text. And that gets very daunting to process and deal with. And a lot of times, if you get a lot of good detail, people end up kind of moving to a quantsy, descriptive at least. They'll code things and count things. So knowing how something exists has such a big role in determining how you're going to investigate it. And this is where I really wanted to kind of show that nexus between ontology and epistemology, in particular empiricism. Because if we say that social reality exists in the interaction between people, or exists in the belief and attitudes of a person, what constitutes an insurrection versus what constitutes legitimate resistance against a tyrannical government, that you have to go to the people and you have to listen. And so how do you study the social world as a social constructivist? And we're going to get, go 10 minutes. If you have any questions now, please write them in the chat. I will try to address them, or any comments, because I'm wrapping up here. I'm going to give you the 10-minute, well, I suppose, Wisconsin, see ya. Tell your folks I says hi. Goodbye. Right. And then that's really the challenge. We have a lot of methods. We have a lot of data collection modes, in qualitative research. That's not to say that the field lacks for good ways of investigating the social construction of reality. But I think there are times when you're like, okay, well, I'm qual, so I do interviews, or I'm quant, so I do surveys, and you don't know why. And at the end of the day, it is these assumptions that when you do a quant's analysis, you're thinking about causality in the world in a different way than when you're a qualitative researcher and you're investigating the outcome of a phenomenon by trying to understand the people's motivations, constraints, wishes, compromises to get to that end point. That you have to understand the way you think the world works changes. And it doesn't mean, like one's wrong. It's just, look, it's the worst form of doing, research except for everything else we've tried. Like, we always have to mediate through our own limitations. And when you understand the question you want to investigate, if you understand its ontology, then its epistemology and its research methodology all will fall into place. All right, I need to take a drink. I'm getting all kinds of... all right. Hey, oh, sorry, I didn't show you. There's it doesn't matter. It was just this picture here. I didn't realize I was on the webcam this whole time, just nattering at you. I thought I was in the background, but yeah, I'm gonna take a little sip off air, and if you have any questions, you've got a couple seconds to post them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going on 4 hours of sleep last night. I was playing D&D till 4, and then I'm on a routine where I get up before 8, so I was up before 8. I think I might have to take a nap before my game tonight. So, yeah, let's just, is there any smooth jazz? What happened to my smooth jazz? I have to check that. No more smooth jazz. Sad face, okay. All right, gone. Okay, very good. Next time, okay. Language is pretty much entirely a process of categorization, and in a process of favoring certain categories over others, meaning is created. Absolutely. Easy 7. Yeah. Abso-freaking-lutely. And if you investigate the philosophy of language, I don't know that linguistics necessarily... linguistics is different from, I think, the philosophy of language. Although, obviously, the philosophy of language is at the grounding of linguistics. But the philosophy of language itself, not just how syntax works, is a really very interesting and fascinating topic, I think. And what is important, and this is, I think, a very important contribution of Wittgenstein, if I'm remembering my philosophy correctly, is his insight. The Vienna Circle had this, we'll have to get into it, but the Vienna Circle had this goal in the early 1930s to try to really get a handle on language and say what is a meaningless statement and what's a meaningful statement based on the content and the form and all these sorts of things. And Wittgenstein did the Tractatus. I can't remember the second word of it, but his first work was the Tractatus, which was very much kind of adhering to this Vienna Circle notion of language being a medium through which we convey things, without too much content or meaning or other stuff. We can get to meaningless statements and meaningful statements if we just think about it hard enough. And then his later works, is it the Meditations? I can't quite remember what his second work was, or just his collected writings, went in completely opposite direction and talked about how language shapes everything. I think one of the examples I remember, I can get out my lecture notes, was if you have a deck of cards, right? You sit them on the table, you can play 5, 10, 15 different games with a deck of cards just by changing the rules. And what are rules? Rules are language. An ace is worth so many points in this game, and it's worth so many points in that game. Nothing changes about the card. It entirely, it's the rules of the game and our perception of it and the language we use to describe the value of this card in that game. So absolutely. Yeah, linguistics is technical and not philosophical. Yeah, that was more the syntax and the way things are used, right? Okay. Yeah, but philosophy of language is cool. All right. Well, thank you for letting me take up your time and just going nerdy things out of my brain onto the screen. I will have a more proper lecture. I didn't have time to have these kinds of just riffing and conversations and interactions in my course, which, by the way, is pretty funny. Somebody in my comments when I checked my YouTube channel the other day, said that, oh, this was really useful to listen to. I'm doing the MRes at Birkbeck. And it was hilarious to me because, like, these are my lecture notes when I taught the MRes at Birkbeck. So if you've been at Birkbeck, that person had been at Birkbeck 10 years ago. They would have gotten these slides, but from me in person. All right. Well, I think I've faffed about enough to the 5 minutes before the hour. All that's left to be said is that I am Kristi. You are awesome. Thank you for your time and attention on this Sunday or later on, depending on when you're watching. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Reality Check. Thank you, Easy7, Deanna Fan. Who else? And Sibi in the chat. And Arjon, I think I saw there. I think that's everyone. If I missed you, I apologize for being a jerk. And until next time, I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. Have a great day whenever, wherever, and whenever it is that you are.